The deep void of space was silent, as always. But for the crew of the Vanguard Explorer, silence was never comforting. Commander Elise Voss sat in the captain's chair, her eyes locked on the holographic display projected from the ship's console. The vessel had picked up an anomalous signal, one unlike anything the crew had encountered before. It was weak, sporadic, and hauntingly alien. "Give me a visual," Elise ordered, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. Lieutenant Marco Hensley, the ship's systems specialist, tapped on his console. The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a massive, derelict structure drifting in the blackness ahead. Its size dwarfed the Vanguard Explorer. Jagged edges protruded from the station's surface, as though it had been torn apart and pieced back together in haste. "What the hell is that?" muttered Dr. Sarah Kendrick, the team's biologist, as she stepped closer to the screen. "Looks like a station," Marco replied, his fingers flying over the keys. "Scans show it's not human. Age? Indeterminate. Power levels are minimal, but something's still running." Elise leaned forward. "Any signs of life?" "None," Marco said after a pause. "But there's something odd." Before he could elaborate, the ship's lights flickered. The hum of the engines wavered, and an uneasy groan reverberated through the hull. "Report," Elise barked. "It's the station," Marco said, wide-eyed. "It's emitting some kind of pulse, a localized energy field. It's pulling us in. Cut engines," Elise commanded. "I'm trying, but it's overriding our systems." The crew braced as the Vanguard Explorer drifted closer to the looming structure. The docking bay of the station yawned open, a gaping maw of darkness. With a jarring thud, the ship docked, its systems going eerily silent. Elise rose from her seat, her commanding presence filling the room. "Suit up. We're going in. If that station has answers, I want to know why it's still active, and why it brought us here." The airlock hissed open, revealing a dimly lit corridor bathed in flickering yellow light. The walls were lined with glyphs that none of the crew could recognize, their shapes twisting in ways that seemed to defy logic. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint hum of the station's dying systems. Elise took point, her flashlight slicing through the gloom. Behind her, Sarah carried her portable bioscanner, while Marco kept his rifle trained on every shadow. Engineers Grant Holson and Nadia Reyes flanked the group, their tools ready for anything mechanical. Lastly, Security Officer Jonah Tate brought up the rear, his eyes scanning for threats. The team moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing. As they advanced, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. It was circular, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. Strange devices lined the walls, their purposes unfathomable. "This place is ancient," Nadia whispered, her voice awestruck. "And yet, it feels alive." Sarah's scanner beeped. "I'm picking up faint biological signatures. Could be microbial. Could be something else." "Let's hope it's the former," Jonah muttered. The chamber was dominated by a large console at its center, its surface glowing faintly. Elise approached it, motioning for Marco to assist. "Can you access it?" she asked. Marco examined the alien interface. "It's like nothing I've ever seen. But I think I can." Before he could finish, the console sprang to life, emitting a low hum. Holographic images filled the air, flickering, distorted visions of creatures. Some were vaguely humanoid, others monstrous. They moved in unnatural ways, their forms shifting and blending like a waking nightmare. "What are we looking at?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "It's an experiment log," Marco said, deciphering the alien script that scrolled across the console. They were creating something, splicing DNA from different species. One of them was human. "Human," Elise repeated, her voice sharp. "Genetic markers match our own," Marco confirmed. "But they were experimenting with other forms of life, too. They were trying to merge them." A sudden noise cut through the air, a metallic scraping sound, distant but growing louder. The crew froze, their eyes darting to the shadows. "What was that?" Jonah asked, raising his weapon. "Movement," Sarah whispered, her grip tightening on her scanner. "I'm picking up something. It's close." The scraping grew louder, accompanied by a guttural clicking noise. Marco's hands flew over the console as he tried to shut it down, but the station seemed to fight back, its lights dimming and flickering erratically. Then, out of the darkness, it appeared. The creature was massive, its form hunched and twisted. Its flesh was a grotesque patchwork of textures, scales, fur, and raw muscle. Its elongated limbs ended in razor-sharp claws, and its eyeless face turned toward them, as if sensing their presence. "Open fire!" Elise shouted. Jonah's rifle blazed, the rounds striking the creature but barely slowing it. The monster let out an ear-splitting roar and lunged toward them. "Fall back!" Elise commanded, firing her own weapon. The team scrambled, retreating through the corridor as the creature pursued them. Its speed was terrifying, its claws tearing through metal like paper. "Get to the ship!" Elise yelled, her voice cutting through the chaos. They reached the airlock, but as Marco worked to override the damaged controls, the creature struck. Its claws raked across Grant, pulling him into the shadows before anyone could react. His screams echoed, then fell silent. "No!" Nadia cried, her voice breaking. "Focus!" Elise barked. "We can't help him now." The airlock finally opened, and the team dove inside, slamming the hatch shut behind them. But the creature didn't relent. It began pounding on the reinforced door, each strike sending tremors through the ship. "We're not safe," Marco said, his face pale. "It's trying to break through." "What did they create here?" Sarah whispered, staring at the console in horror. "We need answers," Elise said, her voice grim. "But first, we need to survive." As the creature's assault continued, the crew realized the terrifying truth. They were trapped, and the station's nightmare wasn't finished with them yet. The airlock shuddered under the relentless assault of the creature outside. The pounding was deafening, each impact sending a visceral jolt through the crew. Elise's mind raced. They had to come up with a plan, fast. "Status on the ship?" Elise demanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. Marco's hands danced over the console, his face pale. "The docking clamps are locked. I'm trying to override, but the station's systems are pushing back." "It's like they're alive." "Alive?" Jonah asked, clutching his rifle. "We don't have time for this sci-fi horror nonsense. Get us out of here." "Marco, keep working," Elise snapped. "Nadia, see if you can bypass the manual locks from the engine room." "Jonah, Sarah, you're with me. We're going to find another way to distract that thing." "Distract it? How?" Sarah asked, clutching her bioscanner. "By finding what it's after," Elise replied grimly. "If this station created that thing, there has to be something controlling it. Maybe we can shut it down." Nadia hesitated but nodded. "I'll do my best. Be careful." She grabbed her toolkit and hurried down a narrow corridor toward the ship's engine room. Elise led Sarah and Jonah back into the station. The pounding on the airlock receded as they moved deeper into the labyrinth of twisting hallways and ominous machinery. The alien glyphs on the walls pulsed faintly, as if responding to their presence. "This place feels wrong," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the dying systems. "It is wrong," Jonah muttered. "And we shouldn't be here." They reached another chamber, smaller than the first but no less disturbing. Rows of cylindrical pods lined the walls, each filled with a viscous green fluid. Inside the pods floated shapes, some humanoid, others grotesque amalgamations of limbs, claws, and otherworldly features. "My God," Sarah gasped, stepping closer to one of the pods. Her scanner beeped wildly. "These aren't just experiments. They're growing them." Elise peered at the console in the center of the room. "Can you tell if these things are alive?" "They are in stasis," Sarah replied. "But the energy levels are fluctuating. It's like the station is waking them up." Jonah cursed under his breath. "We need to destroy this place." "All of it," Elise nodded. "Agreed. But first, we need to figure out how." Marco's voice crackled through their comms. "Commander, I've got bad news." "Of course you do," Elise replied, trying to mask her mounting frustration. "What now?" "The station's energy field is spreading. It's starting to drain power from our ship. If this keeps up, we'll be stranded." Elise clenched her fists. "Understood. Keep working on those overrides." We'll figure out a way to shut this place down. The console in the room flickered to life, its alien interface rearranging itself into a series of cryptic symbols. Sarah hesitated, then began deciphering the data. "This is an origin log," she said, her voice shaking. The station's creators were conducting experiments to merge species, to create a perfect hybrid. They weren't just splicing DNA. They were altering the fundamental nature of life. Jonah looked at the pods in disgust. And this is what they got? A nightmare zoo of abominations. It gets worse, Sarah continued, her eyes widening as she scrolled through the data. They were testing these hybrids for aggression, adaptability, survival instincts. The ones that failed were terminated. But the ones that succeeded. She trailed off, staring at the pod nearest her. The shape inside twitched, as if sensing her gaze. They became weapons, Elise finished grimly. Suddenly, a shrill alarm blared, and the room was bathed in a flashing red light. The fluid in the pods began to bubble, and the creatures within stirred. "We need to go," Jonah said, raising his rifle. Elise tapped her comms. "Nadia, what's your status?" "Almost there," Nadia replied, her voice strained. "But the station systems are fighting me every step of the way." "What's going on?" "The experiments are waking up," Elise said, her voice clipped. "Hurry!" As the crew turned to leave, one of the pods shattered. Glass and fluid sprayed across the room, and the creature inside, a wiry, multi-limbed thing with glistening black skin, emerged with a guttural hiss. "Contact!" Jonah shouted, firing his weapon. The bullets tore into the creature, but it moved with unnatural speed, dodging and lunging at him. Its claws raked across his armor, sending him sprawling. "Jonah!" Elise yelled, firing her own weapon. Sarah scrambled back, her scanner forgotten as she grabbed a small plasma torch from her belt. The creature turned toward her, its eyeless face locking onto her movements. "Stay back," she shouted, igniting the torch and swinging it wildly. The creature hissed, recoiling from the heat. Jonah groaned, pushing himself up. "I'm fine. Let's get the hell out of here." The team retreated, firing at the creature to keep it at bay. More pods began to crack open, the sounds of hissing and snarling filling the air. "Nadia, we're running out of time," Elise yelled into her comms. "I'm bypassing the last lock now," Nadia replied. "Just hold on." The corridor ahead was blocked by another creature, its hulking form tearing through the walls as it charged. Elise fired, her shots slowing it just enough for the team to slip past. The station seemed to twist around them, the walls narrowing and the glyphs pulsating more rapidly. "It's like the whole place is alive," Sarah panted. "And it wants us dead," Jonah added grimly. They finally reached the airlock, where Nadia was frantically working on the controls. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. "Almost got it," Nadia said, slamming a panel shut. The docking clamps released with a metallic groan, and the ship's systems roared back to life. "Go, go, go," Elise shouted, ushering everyone inside. As the airlock sealed, the creatures reached it, clawing at the reinforced metal. The ship pulled away from the station, but the energy field clung to it like a vice, slowing their escape. "Marco, get us out of here," Elise barked. "I'm trying," Marco replied, his hands flying over the controls. The station loomed behind them, its grotesque experiments spilling into the void. But as the ship strained against the field, a new alarm sounded. "What now?" Elise demanded. Marco's face went pale. "The station's powering up. It's charging some kind of weapon." Elise stared at the view screen, where a massive, glowing structure emerged from the station's core. "Brace for impact," she shouted. The station fired, and the crew's nightmare escalated to a horrifying new level. The ship rocked violently as the station's weapon unleashed a torrent of energy. Sparks erupted from control panels, and the lights flickered erratically. The crew clung to whatever they could find for stability, the deafening sound of alarms filling the air. "Report," Elise shouted, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Marco's face was a mask of fear and concentration. "Shields are holding, but barely. That thing's weapon is tearing through our energy reserves. If it hits us again..." "It won't," Elise cut him off. Push the engines to maximum. We need to get out of its range. I'm already at redline. Mako yelled. The engines can't take much more of this. Another pulse from the station rocked the ship, sending Elise sprawling against the bulkhead. Jonah caught her arm, pulling her upright as a spray of sparks rained down from an overhead conduit. Any other brilliant ideas, Commander? Jonah asked, his tone grim. We need to shut that weapon down, Elise said, her mind racing. If we run, it'll just keep firing until we're debris. We have to go back. Go back. Sarah's voice cracked. Are you insane? That station is crawling with those things, and we barely made it out alive. Elise's eyes locked onto hers, steely with determination. We don't have a choice. Mako, bring us about. Get as close to the station as you can without being obliterated. Mako hesitated but nodded. On it. Sarah, Jonah, gear up, Elise ordered. Nadia, you stay here and keep the engines hot. If we don't make it back. Don't finish that sentence, Nadia interrupted, her voice tight. You'll make it back. Elise gave her a faint smile. Let's hope you're right. The station loomed ahead as the ship skirted its perimeter. The grotesque architecture seemed to shift and pulsate, the alien glyphs glowing brighter as if in response to their approach. The energy weapon hummed ominously, its core a blinding sphere of light. Docking complete, Mako reported. But I can't guarantee the ship will hold up if we take another hit. We won't be long, Elise promised, checking her weapon. Let's move. Elise, Jonah, and Sarah stepped into the station, weapons at the ready. The air inside was thick and oppressive, the sound of distant snarls echoing through the corridors. Where's this weapon's power source likely to be? Jonah asked, his voice low. Sarah studied her scanner. The energy signature is strongest near the station's core. That's where we need to go. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The glyphs on the walls pulsed rhythmically, almost as if they were alive. Elise's grip tightened on her weapon. Every corner, every shadow, felt like a potential ambush. As they approached the core, the hallway widened into a cavernous chamber. At its center was the weapon's energy core, a massive, pulsating orb suspended in a lattice of alien machinery. The air crackled with static, and the temperature rose sharply. There it is, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide. But how do we shut it down? Before Elise could respond, a guttural growl echoed through the chamber. They turned to see a hulking creature emerge from the shadows. It was larger than any they'd encountered before, its muscular form bristling with spikes and glowing with the same eerie light as the core. Contact! Jonah shouted, opening fire. The creature roared, charging at them with terrifying speed. Jonah's bullets slowed it but didn't stop it. Elise joined the assault, her plasma rifle lighting up the chamber as she aimed for its head. Sarah, shut that thing down! Elise yelled, firing in controlled bursts. I'm trying! Sarah screamed, sprinting toward the core. She dodged a swipe from the creature's massive claw, narrowly avoiding being crushed. Her hands flew over the alien console, desperately trying to decipher the controls. The creature turned its attention to her, its glowing eyes narrowing. Jonah threw himself in its path, firing relentlessly. Over here, you ugly bastard! The distraction worked, but only briefly. The creature swiped at Jonah, knocking him into a wall with bone-crushing force. He crumpled to the floor, groaning in pain. Jonah! Elise screamed, her heart pounding. She fired again, aiming for the creature's joints. The plasma bolts finally hit a weak point, causing it to stumble. Got it! Sarah shouted. The core began to flicker, its glow dimming. The creature roared in fury, its movements becoming more erratic. It lashed out blindly, striking the machinery around the core. Sparks flew as the chamber shook violently. We need to get out of here, Sarah yelled, sprinting back toward Elise. Not without Jonah, Elise said, rushing to his side. She hoisted him onto her shoulder, gritting her teeth against the weight. Move! The chamber erupted into chaos as the core destabilized. Machinery exploded, and the walls began to collapse. The creature let out one final, ear-piercing scream before it was consumed by the collapsing structure. The team sprinted back to the ship, the station shaking around them. Marco's voice crackled through their comms. What the hell is going on in there? We shut down the weapon, but the whole place is coming apart. Elise replied. Prepare for emergency takeoff. They stumbled into the airlock as the station began to implode. Nadia helped drag Jonah inside while Marco initiated the undocking sequence. The ship lurched as it pulled away, the station collapsing in on itself. Through the viewport, they watched as the station was consumed by its own energy, the weapon's core exploding in a blinding flash. The shockwave rocked the ship, but Marco managed to stabilize it. Elise slumped into a chair, her body aching and her mind racing. Jonah groaned, clutching his ribs but managing a weak smile. We made it, Sarah whispered, her voice tinged with disbelief. For now, Elise said, her eyes fixed on the remains of the station. But we're not out of this yet. The ship's interior was eerily quiet after the harrowing escape. The crew's breaths came in ragged gasps, the adrenaline of survival still coursing through their veins. The viewport displayed the obliterated remains of the alien station, its debris scattering like glittering fragments across the void. But relief was short-lived. Status report, Elise demanded, her voice firm despite the exhaustion tugging at her. Marco's hands danced over the controls. Engines are holding, but barely. Shields are at 20%, and the weapon's energy spike overloaded half our systems. We're running blind on some sensors. Elise glanced at Nadia, who was crouched beside Jonah, patching his wounds. Jonah, I'll live, he groaned, wincing as Nadia tightened a makeshift bandage around his ribs. But I'm not sprinting anywhere anytime soon. Sarah was hunched over a console, her face illuminated by its dim glow. Elise, we've got a problem. Of course we do, Elise muttered. What now? Sarah turned, her expression grave. The station wasn't destroyed completely. A large section of it survived and is still emitting a signal. A distress signal. Elise's stomach sank. A distress signal to who? I don't know, Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. But whatever it's calling, it's big. And it's coming fast. Marco's console beeped in warning. Contact. Multiple contacts, incoming at high speed. His voice cracked as he looked at Elise. It's not just one. It's an entire fleet. The ship shuddered violently as the first alien vessel appeared, a massive, angular craft bristling with weaponry. It was soon followed by another, then another, until a dozen ships formed an ominous perimeter around the surviving debris of the station. How long until they reach us? Elise asked, her mind racing. Marco shook his head. They are not heading for us. They are forming a defensive ring around the remains of the station. Elise frowned. Defensive? Why would they? Her question was interrupted by a flash of light. A massive, oblong pod was ejected from one of the alien ships, hurtling toward the station's wreckage. It docked seamlessly, its presence igniting a wave of energy that rippled through the debris. The fragments began to reassemble, reshaping themselves into a grotesque amalgamation of metal and organic material. What the hell is that? Jonah rasped, forcing himself upright. Nadia stared at the screen, her face pale. It's rebuilding itself. The station, it's alive. Elise didn't hesitate. We can't let them finish whatever they are doing. Marco, plot an escape course. Sarah, find a way to mask our energy signature. We need to disappear before they. The ship jolted as a warning alarm blared. Marco's hands flew over the controls. They've locked onto us. Incoming fighters. 3 sleek, alien ships peeled away from the fleet, their engines glowing with a sickly green hue. They closed the distance with terrifying speed, weapons lighting up the darkness of space. Brace for impact. Marco shouted. The first volley slammed into their shields, sending the crew tumbling. Elise gripped her console, shouting commands. Return fire. Marco, evasive maneuvers. Plasma turrets sprang to life, spitting fiery bolts at the incoming fighters. Marco weaved the ship through the barrage, narrowly dodging the alien ship's relentless assault. The crew worked in frantic unison, their actions synchronized by sheer desperation. One down. Sarah yelled as a fighter exploded, its wreckage spiraling into the void. 2 more still on us, Marco growled, sweat dripping down his temple. And I can't keep this up forever. Elise's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the fleet, and their firepower was no match for the aliens. But they didn't need to win, they just needed to survive. Nadia, Jonah, prepare a decoy, Elise ordered. We'll eject one of the damaged reactors and overload it. Make it look like we've self-destructed. Jonah nodded, grimacing as he forced himself to his feet. On it. Nadia hesitated. If we blow a reactor, we'll lose half our power. We'll be sitting ducks. Not if it works, Elise countered. Do it. Minutes felt like hours as Jonah and Nadia rigged the reactor. The ship bucked under another hit, and Marco cursed. We're out of time. Decoys ready. Nadia called out, her hands flying across the controls. Ejecting now. A blazing ball of energy shot from the ship, its unstable core glowing brighter with every passing second. Marco veered the ship sharply, cutting power to their engines to mimic the appearance of a drifting, disabled vessel. The alien fighters hesitated, scanning the decoy. Moments later, the reactor detonated, the explosion blinding in its intensity. The shockwave rattled the ship, but when the light faded, the fighters had broken formation. They're retreating, Marco said, disbelief in his voice. The decoy worked. Elise exhaled a shaky breath. Get us out of here. Now. As the ship limped through the void, the tension finally began to ease. The crew slumped in their seats, their exhaustion catching up with them. Elise stared out the viewport, her thoughts churning. What's the plan now? Sarah asked quietly. Elise didn't answer immediately. She watched as the alien fleet disappeared into the distance, their grotesque station pulsing with renewed life. The knowledge that they had uncovered something far beyond their understanding weighed heavily on her. We warn Earth, she said finally. Whatever that thing is, it's not staying out here. It's preparing for something, and we need to be ready. Jonah chuckled weakly. Great. Just another day in deep space, huh? Elise managed a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Yeah, just another day. As the ship set course for home, the crew silently hoped they would have time to prepare for what was coming. But deep down, they all knew the truth. This was only the beginning.